Hello everyone, and today we're going to be talking about Germany. Now this video is actually the first in a series of videos to prepare for my trip at the end of this summer to going to Europe. Now, for those of you guys that are not aware, I just previously announced last month that I will be going to Germany and Italy at the end of July, beginning of August of this year. Oh my gosh, this guy's mowing the lawn over here, so excuse him, guys. You know, I hate lawnmowers. Jeez, lawnmowers always ruining my content. But anyway, I just thought this was a cool backdrop. So I will be going to Germany. So from this point forward, starting this week on Wednesday, every Wednesday throughout the rest of the time, the next 10 or 11 weeks leading up to my trip, I'm going to be doing a video about German history. Mainly German political history, because that's where my strong suit is and the most interesting to me. We're going to be going over the various kingdoms that existed in Germany, the former kingdoms before the dissolution of the monarchies in World War I. And we'll get a gist of how each region of Germany is, and you're going to learn a lot about Germany in the next several weeks if you keep watching the series every week. So thank you guys for doing that. I'm going to try to make sure that I continue to post this every week, so it'll be good. But anyway, today we're going to be talking about the history of Germany. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is Germany is a relatively new country. With that, I mean Germany as we know it today has only existed since 1990. Yes, pretty crazy, I know. It's only existed about 35 years, but German history and the history of Germany as a country goes back way further. Germany is one of those countries in Europe that I would argue probably has changed hands the most times of any country in Europe. It's gone through the most change probably of any country in Europe. It's definitely up there for contender. If it's not the number one, it's definitely top three. So Germany is a mess historically, and you will find out why in this video, because we're going to be going through everything you need to know about it. So the word Germany comes from the Roman term Germania, which was used to describe the region ruled by the barbarians that the Romans called them. Because Germania was pretty infamous. If you're a Roman scholar, if you know anything about the Roman Empire, all of the emperors that reigned in the Roman Empire could never hold on to Germania. Germania was the one region in Europe that the Romans could just not get. Augustus and many others tried to take Germania, but they never could, and if they did, it only lasted a little bit because the Germanic barbarians ended up taking it back. In fact, a German king named Odoacer conquered the Roman capital in 476 AD, bringing an end to the empire. The Germanic tribes, Germanic people at this time, basically led to the fall of Rome, obviously with internal strife. The whole fall of the Roman Empire is just a complete and utter chaos, and there's really not one thing you can point to because there was a lot going on there. But that's how that was. That's where we get the term Germania from, because the tribes that existed in the Germanic territory were not as sophisticated and consolidated and more up to date with all the other countries and nations that you would call at the time that existed in the European foothold. Germanic tribes, however, were never 100% taken over until about another 300 years when a guy comes along named Charlemagne. I'm going to go see his grave in a couple months, so if you guys want to check out that video, that'll be epic. He's from Aachen. Charlemagne is the king of the Franks at this time, and he's soughting a lot of expansion, and he's the greatest ruler Europe has seen since the fall of Rome, hands down. He rules from 768 to 814. During the late 700s, Charlemagne conquers the Lombards in Italy and the Germanic tribes. He crosses the Rhine River, being the first Western European to do so pretty much in history, and conquers most of what we call today Germany, assimilating the Germanic tribes and Germanic territory into the Frankish Empire. Charlemagne wanted to restore a great empire in Europe in the likes of Rome, and was actually crowned emperor by Pope Leo III on Christmas Day 800 AD. Now, that was short-lived because about a generation and a half later, civil war breaks out. Charlemagne dies in 814. He was succeeded by his son Louis the Pious when he died in 814. But this was an interesting situation because the empire is so big. Charlemagne had originally anticipated on splitting the empire amongst his sons, giving the French territory that we now call France to one of his sons, and the Italian territory and the Germanic territory up. However, all of Charlemagne's children died before him, with the exception of his youngest son, Louis the Pious. Now, Louis the Pious ends up inheriting the entire Frankish Empire, and he's the last person to rule over it ever, because after that, the kingdom gets split. During the latter parts of Louis the Pious's reign, his three sons, Charles the Bald, Louis the German, and Lothair, all posed rebellions against him in the 830s to try to steal some of it and curb their father's power so they can inherit the lands of the Franks. So, there was a huge civil war. It's called the Carolingian Civil War between Louis the Pious's three sons during his lifetime. But the war continued, in the internal strife, family feud, whatever you want to call it, continued after the death of Louis the Pious. Louis the Pious passes away in 840. And 3 years later, in 843, the Treaty of Verdun is signed in Verdun, if you couldn't tell. That was where it was signed. But the Treaty of Verdun was signed in 843, splitting the Frankish territory into three realms: West Francia, Middle Francia, and East Francia. Germany corresponds with East Francia, and that was given to Ludwig the German, or Louis the German. The other two sons of Louis the Pious, Lothair, ended up Middle Francia, which mostly takes place in the Low Countries in Italy today, and the West Francia was given to Charles the Bald, which will turn into France eventually. That's how they get the term France, was from the Franks. But we're only focused with East Francia because East Francia is given to Louis the German, and it is through him that we get the precursors to what will later become Germany. A couple generations down the line, East Francia has a good run of about 120 years before a bold move happens. One of the kings of East Francia, Otto the Great, is crowned Holy Roman Emperor in the year 962. Now, this Otto the Great is considered to be the first Holy Roman Emperor, not Charlemagne. Some people argue Charlemagne was, but I don't. Otto the Great was the first emperor to actually take the title of Holy Roman Emperor. So, the Holy Roman Empire is officially established in the German territory. The Holy Roman Empire is going to last for the next 900 years. But the Holy Roman Emperors did a really bad job early on at consolidating their domains. And so we get a map that looks like this. What the flying French toast is this? This is every geographer and historian's worst nightmare right here. Look at this. And this is what we have to deal with, and this is why German history is so complicated, because all of these little states were all part of the Holy Roman Empire. But each of these states had a duke, a grand duke, a landgrave, a king, what have you, in them. And these kingdoms are going to come and go. Now, the Holy Roman Empire is going to last and suffer for the next 1,000 years. Eventually, in 1806, Napoleon puts the Holy Roman Empire out of its misery and conquers most of the territory of it and establishes the Confederation of the Rhine. And the rest of the series is mainly going to be touching on Germany, because after Napoleon's kicked out, they're going to start what is called the German Confederation. Because in 1813, the Battle of Leipzig takes place, which is a defeat for Napoleon, and he's basically kicked out of the German lands. And the Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 1815 is going to officially establish what we call the German Confederation, which is also going to be kind of a disaster. It still looks like a disaster, but it's a little bit less of a disaster than the Holy Roman Empire. But that's what's created in 1815, and that is where Germany starts to become Germany. Now, there's still a lot of work that needs to happen, and I'm going to go show you guys this on this chart that I made on the wall, and going through all the head of states of Germany. And it was extra funny because they actually made the former Holy Roman Emperor, Franz II, the president of the German Confederation. So We're going to learn all about the German Confederation today, which eventually becomes the North German Confederation and then the German Empire. And we're going to learn everything else that there is to know about Germany today in this video. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritties in the next couple episodes. All right, guys, so I've made this lovely chart here on the wall. We're going to start with the end and the collapse of the disastrous Holy Roman Empire right here, which lasted from 962 to 1806. We're going to get into when Germany finally starts to become Germany and the modern world and modern European history shapes the country. So, the last Holy Roman Emperor was Franz II, who reigned from 1792 to 1806. He was part of the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, which was the Austrian branch of that house. The Spanish branch died off due to inbreeding back in 1700, but that's a story for another day. Franz II was the last Holy Roman Emperor. Now, as I previously mentioned, the Holy Roman Empire ceased to exist in 1806 and was a complete and utter mess. You had kingdoms, grand duchies, duchies, landgraviates, principalities all over the empire, if you could even call it an empire. It wasn't really an empire. The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor much of an empire. Ha ha, to see that joke. Thanks, Voltaire, for that one. But yeah, that's what happened. Napoleon put the Holy Roman Empire out of its misery and established the Napoleonic version of Germany, the Confederation of the Rhine, which is right here. Napoleon's first invasion of the German lands happened around the Austria-German territory at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, and in 1806 he subsumed the entire kingdom of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, let's take a quick look at this map. This is a map of the Confederation of the Rhine. Really interesting. So we can see all the kingdoms that existed. Napoleon set up a bunch of kingdoms. The Kingdom of Bavaria, Saxony, Westphalia, Hanover, and then some Grand Duchies like Baden down here, Kingdom of Württemberg, Grand Duchy of Berg, and then over here was the Kingdom of Prussia. The Kingdom of Prussia had existed before. He made it separate as well because most of these German kingdoms did support Napoleon. Prussia was not a part of this alliance at first, so Napoleon pushed all of this here and made it the Confederation of the Rhine, which he was the made a protectorate of his empire. That lasted until 1813, until I previously mentioned the Battle of Leipzig, which kicked Napoleon out of the German lands at that time. After his suffering defeat in the Russian front in 1812, he was slowly pushed back into France, where he was eventually put in exile and died later on. So that was part of his empire for about 7 years. After Napoleon was exiled, the entirety of European history would change forever. And Napoleon really reshaped Europe. The Congress of Vienna was established in 1814 after Napoleon was exiled. The Congress of Vienna is very important. A lot of people don't know too much about it in European history, so I'm going to give a quick rundown of what it was. Basically, it was a meeting, international meeting, with a bunch of different countries. France was involved, the Russians were involved, British. Most countries in Europe came to this Congress in Vienna to discuss for several months what post-Napoleonic Europe was going to look like. Long story short, for Germany, this was very influential. It created what we now call the German Confederation. The German Confederation existed from 1815 all the way until 1866. And there was a bunch of things that happened with this agreement at the Congress of Vienna. All of these kingdoms that Napoleon had set up were allowed to stay. That is why it is known as the Confederation of Germany, because it's a confederation of all these kingdoms that still exist. However, they are in charge. They're all part of a united country, kind of. They have a central government. The Congress of Vienna chose to appoint the now Emperor of Austria and the former Holy Roman Emperor as the president of the German Confederation. And that's going to stay with the Habsburg line for the next 2 generations. After Franz II dies in 1835, the title of president of the German Confederation is going to go to Ferdinand I. Ferdinand I was his son, and Ferdinand I ended up abdicating the throne in 1848 due to the revolutions that happened within the German Confederation. Now, the Austrian emperor ended up getting this title because Austria was the most powerful kingdom within the German Confederation. But keep in mind, Austria is over here. Austria has lands outside of the Confederation, but so does Prussia. And Prussia is becoming very powerful and wants to expand at this time. So the Austrians are going to slowly start losing battles and things in the German Confederation. After Ferdinand II abdicates due to the revolutions of 1848, the throne is going to pass to his nephew, Franz Joseph I, who becomes Emperor of Austria. He ruled Austria for 68 years and actually died during World War I at the age of 86. This is the palace in Vienna that the Austrian emperors lived in. Franz Joseph was forced to give up the titles of president of the German Confederation, and the German Confederation ceased to exist in 1866 due to one major threat in the land: Prussia. The Kingdom of Prussia started in 1701 and will eventually end up conquering the entire country of Germany. The Kingdom of Prussia was ruled by the House of Hohenzollern. It was originally a duchy within the Holy Roman Empire back in the 1520s. In 1701, the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, I believe, was Leopold I. He allowed the Prussians to become a kingdom within the Holy Roman Empire. And they were going to become very powerful. If you've ever heard of Frederick the Great, he was an old Prussian king back in the 1700s. Now, by the time we get to Franz Joseph's time, the King of Prussia at the time is Wilhelm I, who becomes King of Prussia upon the death of his brother, Friedrich Wilhelm IV, in 1861. So he is serving as the king in Hanover. Now keep in mind, the King of Prussia. Now keep in mind, Wilhelm I is the King of Prussia at the same time Franz Joseph is the King of Austria and also the President of the German Confederation. So technically, Austria at this time is the most powerful country in the German Confederation, the most powerful state. Well, Wilhelm I is very ambitious, and in my opinion, Wilhelm I is one of the most underrated German figures in history. He did the most good for Germany of any country, or of any leader that has ever existed. Wilhelm I was incredible for what he wanted to do. Wilhelm I wanted Germany to be powerful, and wanted it to be an empire, just like the Russians and the French were at this time. He admired the French and the Russians at this time, who were the two most powerful empires in Europe at the time. The German Confederation lacked much of a central focus because there were so many states everywhere. The German Confederation the Germans couldn't do this. Wilhelm I decides to take for the German Confederation this land up here in the north from the Danish. He fights Denmark in the early 1860s to take this area. Napoleon set up the Duchy of Holstein, but there is another duchy above it, north of it, called Schleswig. So, in the war, the Dano-Prussian War was what it was called, Wilhelm I took over Schleswig-Holstein for the Germans. Additionally, Wilhelm sees the opportunity for Prussia to kick the Austrians out. The only way that Prussians are going to get what they want in the German Confederation is they're going to need to kick the Austrians out of the German Confederation. So, he goes to war against Franz Joseph in 1866. It's also known as the 7 Weeks' War, and also goes by the name the Austro-Prussian War. This kicks Franz Joseph and the Austrians out of the German Confederation. The German Confederation ceased to exist, and it becomes the North German Confederation with Prussia at its head. So Wilhelm I becomes the first president and only president of the North German Confederation. There's still one problem, and Wilhelm sees this as the biggest threat near him: France. At this time, France is going through its second empire with Napoleon III down here. After Napoleon was exiled, they restored the House of Bourbon in one of the stipulations of the Congress of Vienna. But most of the French didn't like this, and France went through about 3 or 4 more revolutions until we get to this point. That's a story for another day. French history in the 19th century is insane. But this is what happens. Napoleon III is the emperor of the French. Wilhelm of Prussia decides that he's going to take out the French Empire. So he wages war on them in 1870. This is known as the Franco-Prussian War. But the Franco-Prussian War was an interesting situation because the French were actually on the offensive, even though the Prussians kind of prompted the war. But, long story short, Napoleon III gets defeated in this war. The Prussians take over Paris momentarily, and Wilhelm is crowned German Emperor at the Glass Hall in Paris. creating what we now know today as the German Empire. And he's pronounced the Kaiser, which is a throwback to the word Caesar from the Roman times. Kaiser would have been more close to the Latin pronunciation of the word Caesar. So he becomes German Kaiser in 1871 and appoints one of his greatest generals, Otto von Bismarck, to the title of Chancellor. He's the very first Chancellor in 1871, serves that position until 1890 for the next 19 years. Otto von Bismarck is one of the most brilliant diplomats of the entire era in German history, and it was the alliance between these two men that made Germany as powerful as it was, and it became the most powerful country in Europe at the time. Wilhelm I dies in 1888, succeeded by his son, Friedrich III, for about 99 days before he dies, and the throne passes to Wilhelm II. This is the palace in Berlin that the the Kaisers lived in. I'm going to go see this as well this summer, so keep in mind there. But the capital of Prussia was in Berlin originally. That's how the capital, when Wilhelm I kicks the Austrians out, the capital's moved to Berlin, which is where it is today. So that's what happens. 1888 is known as the year of the three Kaisers because all three of these men served as Kaiser in the year 1888. And Kaiser Wilhelm is going to rule as Emperor of Germany until the end of World War I, when the Germans lose that war, and one of the articles in Treaty of Versailles at the end of the war forces Germany to give up all of its monarchical positions, including Kaiser, not just Kaiser, but all of the other kingdoms as well. In Bavaria, Württemberg, Saxony, and all the Grand Duchies are forced to give up their monarchies in favor of a republic that's going to be called the Weimar Republic. And also, Germany is required to demilitarize most of their areas around their borders so they can't wage war on other countries. That's what happens in World War I. But a guy with a funny mustache comes along and violates that treaty. So here's what happens. After the Germans lose World War I, Kaiser Wilhelm II decides to live the rest of his life in exile in the Netherlands with Queen Wilhelmina. I think it's kind of funny that the Queen of the Netherlands at the time was named Wilhelmina and his name was Wilhelm II. I mean, it's kind of weird. He actually ends up dying during World War II in 1941. However, his remains are still in the Netherlands today, and he told the German people to not return his body back to Germany until the monarchy was restored. So technically, whenever they restore the German monarchy, they have to return Wilhelm II's remains back to Germany. But he died at the old age of 82, got to live the rest of his life in peace in the Netherlands. Meanwhile, in Germany, a new government is set up, the Weimar Republic, in 1919, appointing Friedrich Ebert as the first president. Now, he ends up dying in office in 1925, and the title of president goes to Paul von Hindenburg right here. Hindenburg was one of the top-ranking generals of the German army during World War I under the Kaiser. It was him and Erich Ludendorff. Hindenburg becomes the president because he's one of the most famous people in Germany at the time. Like I said, he was a military guy. But toward the end of Hindenburg's presidency, this guy over here named Adolf Hitler becomes very popular. And he joins the Nazi Party in 1920 down in the Bavarian region around Munich. He leads what is called the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, and he gets thrown in prison for about 9 months before he's able to be paroled, and he comes out and then basically gets really popular. The Weimar Republic had a really weird clause in its constitution that said that every time that when people refused to vote on things in Congress or whatever, refused to make decisions with a certain amount of people, there would be a new voting. And so, long story short, Hitler rises up the Nazi Party. They gain a lot of support because during this time the Great Depression is happening and all this stuff, and the Germans decide to side with the Nazis because they say they're going to fix all their problems. And so the Nazis gain enough seats in the Reichstag, which is basically the Congress, that they can control everything by leaving during meetings to trigger new elections, so on and so forth, until they basically conquer the whole thing. Long story short, Hitler is appointed chancellor by Paul von Hindenburg, and he did not want to do so, but he was basically forced to do this, make this decision, even though Hindenburg did not want to do this. Hitler then becomes, the chancellor is a very powerful position because the chancellor is the leader of the Reichstag. So Hitler basically controls everything. He passes an act to eliminate the office of president after Hindenburg's death the next year in 1934, and Adolf Hitler becomes the Führer of Germany in 1933. Fun fact, today, if you're watching this video on the day it comes out, is the 80th anniversary of Adolf Hitler's death in 1945, and he establishes Nazi Germany, also known as the Third Reich. It's called the Third Reich because it was the Third Empire. The German Empire is known as the Second Reich, and then the Holy Roman Empire is called the First Reich. So that's where you get Third Reich from. You'll hear that as well. Hitler made the territory of Germany larger than it had ever been in history during the Second World War, which you can debate on if that was a good thing for Germany or not. I'm not going to go into that right now, but Adolf Hitler expanded Germany's territories the furthest they had ever been. However, he ends up losing that war toward the end in 1945 and ends up committing suicide in the Führer bunker in Berlin on April 30th, 1945. He's briefly succeeded by Karl Donitz. After this, the Allies sign an agreement after World War II is over to occupy and rebuild the country of Germany. France, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union were the four victors of that war. I don't really understand why France did, because Hitler wiped them out in 2 weeks, but that's besides the point. They get to occupy Germany now. The Soviet Union, however, refused to give back the country in 1949, which was the agreement. The Soviets had that part up in the northeast of the country. They made that part communist, whereas the US, Britain, and France gave the country back to Germany, and that is why for about 50 years, 41 years, we get the division between East and West Germany. And if you're over the age of 40 watching this video, you might remember when East and West Germany existed as separate countries. The Berlin Wall is built in Berlin because it was part of the city that's communist and capitalist. So we have East Germany and West Germany. These are a couple of the leaders that I put here. So this is established in 1949. East Germany joins the Warsaw Pact and is basically a puppet state of the Soviet Union, just like most countries in Eastern Europe were at the time during the Cold War. And the West joined NATO after, because they feared an Eastern invasion. The Berlin Wall ends up falling in 1989. The Soviet Union collapses 2 weeks later. Cold War basically comes to an end. At this time, the president of West Germany, who is known as, or his name is Richard von Weizsäcker, and he is the president of West Germany who unifies the country back up. And that's where today we get the Federal Republic of Germany since 1990, with the current president being Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and he has been the president since 2017. I'd like to make a quick side note that Frank-Walter Steinmeier is the president of Germany, but the federal chancellor is Olaf Scholz, who is actually in charge of the government. Today in Germany, Steinmeier is simply just the head of state as president. That is a brief overview of German history from Roman times all the way through the present. So obviously I did that pretty quick. You guys probably, there's a lot to go into there, but let me know what you guys think. In the next video, we're going to be talking about Prussia. So stay tuned in about 2 weeks and we'll go into the Prussian monarchs to get more of an idea about the Hohenzollerns before Kaiser Wilhelm I. So thank you guys for watching. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe. We're almost at 3,000 subscribers. If you could hit that subscribe button, get us over that, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Wow.